Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Masks Off. I'm Kim.
And I'm Tia.
And we're so excited to be here today recording, even though we just weren't quite on our game this morning. It took us a little bit of time to come together and figure out what we wanted to do and say.
And
But
catch
we
up
are
on a lot of other stuff
and
too.
catch up. Yes, but we are ready. We are going to talk about contrast today. So, as usual, I will begin with a quote. Contrast is not bad, since the contrast we experience still causes us to learn and grow, by Alaric Hutchinson. And that's the part that I like about it, is that it helps us to learn and grow.
Totally.
And I never used to see it that way.
No.
The contrast was just, I was always in resistance to it. Right.
Yeah.
So,
and it would take over, right?
And it would take over. Or just like you're at the mercy, you're like at the mercy of, and I'll give an example, you're at the mercy of wanting something to be other than what it is. Yes. And my kids do this all the time lately. So again, here in upstate New York right now, it's completely gray outside, totally gray, cold, miserable. Yesterday was freezing with the wind. It was just, listen, you live in upstate New York, you live in the northern hemisphere, you got to get used to having the winters at this point, right? And all I'm hearing them say, and me too, and used to, I can't wait for summer. I can't wait for summer. And then when summer's here, I can't wait for winter.
It's too hot.
It's too hot. Okay, can you just be happy already, right? And we're talking about contrast.
Exactly.
And not being able to just be okay with the as is. So I don't know. I'm thinking of that example. What are you thinking of? What shows up for you?
For me, the contrast is what took me a long time to learn is not necessarily the form-based, but the formless. So more the bad negative feelings, big feelings. Because growing up, I wasn't, you don't show that. You're just supposed to be happy and flow and, be the good girl. And so recognizing and starting to learn that, it's okay to feel crappy. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be frustrated, as long as you understand, and process it and don't take it out on other people, because back then it would build up and then my mom and I would get in a fight when I was a teenager or whatever. Or early parenting, I didn't know how to handle the big feelings that were happening with my kids. And so I would go into control versus now I'm like, oh, it's an opportunity to learn. It's the contrast. Now knowing I don't have to be happy all the time and sunshine and rainbows. It's okay to just be blah. Just, okay.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with being just okay. Or I'm having a kind of a crappy day. I need some space. Just give me some space. I need to process. So for me, it's that contrast is what's coming to mind, just because I've had so much growth and awareness, and I am so grateful for the contrast now. So now when something comes up and I'm feeling out of balance and I notice I'm, a little more sensitive to my triggers, that it's an opportunity with that contrast to know, this is not my normal anymore. Normally I notice that and I can go within, or I'm not so activated. I'm getting poked more. So what's going on within me? What's the lesson? So this contrast is showing up. Okay, so have I not been taking care of myself as well in body, mind, and spirit? What's out of balance? So the contrast of balance, of being able to get those pokes and not be activated, versus if I'm getting poked and activated, there's something going on within me. So it's that contrast of okayness and out of balance. Like I'm thinking of the waves, you always use the waves, right? So I'm letting the waves topple me over, or I'm just riding the waves. And having that contrast has been so helpful for my own internal growth. So I'm not projecting and regurgitating on others. That makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. And I'm thinking too, when you talk about the feelings, the big feelings and emotions, that there's always the saying that you can't really know joy unless you know sadness,
Right.
right? You can't
Right.
know the joy and yet we are wired though to resist
Mm-hmm.
the negative or the painful.
Right.
Our minds are wired to move away from the pain and toward the pleasure. But we can't go ahead. You were going to say
No,
something.
keep going.
I was just going to say, but again, going back to the quote, it's very hard to learn and grow unless you have both. If all we have is vanilla ice cream, if we're all vanilla,
How
how do
boring.
we, right? How do we know chocolate chip cookie dough? How do you know Rocky Road if you only are vanilla?
Or if you're from Madison, orange custard chocolate chip from Babcock Ice Cream.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty
Okay,
good.
that's a flavor right there.
It's delicious. But I would not know that if I never had it.
That's right. If you don't have the contrast to the plain vanilla, you wouldn't know.
Right. And I think recognizing what you just said is we're wired to move away from pain. So yes, and life is pain.
I know.
Yet we are so resistant to the pain and the uncomfort that we feel. But when we start to make friends with it in a way of, oh, okay, this is a painful day. This is a painful moment, rather than trying to suppress and run from it and help our brain start to integrate and understand that, you know what, I'm still safe. It's just pain. And not to belittle pain. And we're talking more emotional pain here. We're not talking,
Right. We're not talking
just to be
physical.
clear.
Yes.
That you have a choice. And when we just sit with the pain, it flows and integrates and moves through us. And we often have a lesson too. And there's that growth, right?
And we can suffer less when we allow ourselves to feel the pain, right? Because the Buddhists say pain times resistance equals the suffering.
Correct.
So pain is inevitable. There's always pain. But you know what? There is a caveat to that though, too, because there's pain that happens in the moment.
Yeah.
Right? That happens now.
Yeah.
But then there's pain that comes up from childhood.
Oh, I'm glad you brought this up.
And yes, because that, and especially if it's trauma based, whether it's a little trauma or a big trauma,
right?
It can be re-triggering. So we have to be careful with that pain and to get somebody like a professional or someone to help you through that. If you have, and also if the pain is coming up, a lot of times we'll want to push it down with a numbing behavior. So that's going on too. So I think it's important that we distinguish between, pain from the inner child, pain from trauma that needs to be healed.
Right.
Versus something painful that's happening in the current moment. Painful, you lose your job. Painful, you lose a loved one. Painful, there's a divorce. Like that's happening in the now versus something that happened from when you were a child.
And recognizing that the pain that's happening in the now, we often end up being triggered because of our past pain. So it ends up not being about the pain in the now. We're actually reliving an old pain. It's just the pain in the moment triggers our unworthiness, our lack from that old pain from previous. And so it gets so intertwined, and until we are able to take a step back and be curious and notice, it's like, wait a minute. Okay, this is upsetting in the moment, but I'm really reliving an experience I had from before. Whether we're able to identify it or not doesn't always happen, because it may not, as you mentioned, it's in your subconscious mind. You talk about a lot on previous episodes. So recognizing there's healing to be done. And so there's the contrast with the invitation to learn and grow.
Exactly. 100% of the people that I have worked with, their pain, their suffering is connected to their inner child, to
Totally.
the things that have happened to them as a child. So it may, like you said, it can get tricky because it might look like it's happening in the now. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, a person might have an interaction with a boss, let's say, for example, and the boss says something that the boss has a tone. The boss says something with a condescending voice, or raises his voice or her voice or whatever, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
seems like it's happening in the now, and it triggers a feeling within me of like, oh my gosh, I feel horrible. I feel ashamed. I feel this, I feel that, or whatever the feeling that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And that trigger, that feeling is coming from, most of the time, I've found that it comes from childhood, from the inner child.
And it's not that what happened in the moment may not be hurtful to have, but it gets
Yes.
exacerbated.
Yes.
And it now becomes attached with a story. It's kind of like
Yes.
we've used the example before, like it's raining, or like yesterday in Wisconsin, we always have spring storms. It's just what it is. We had this beautiful weather, and then we had 3 inches of snow yesterday.
Oh
So
my
I'm
God.
looking out again where before it was starting to like show little bits of green, and now it's all white. So I could attach a story like you were talking about spring and winter, but so the pain of, oh, spring was here and now it's gone, and not. So what is that triggering within me?
Exactly. What is it triggering? Do you know?
Well, I didn't have it, so it's really.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying for some people,
Yeah.
like for me, I'm like, yeah, it's snowing. It's going to melt. And
Yeah.
even if it doesn't melt, it's March, and it's pretty normal to have snow in March. So
Right.
I was not attached to it.
Right.
I was not attached that spring is here. I was not attached. I was just in the moment. Whereas someone else experienced the snow yesterday, oh, and attaches to this. Oh, now it's
Yeah.
cold again. It was so nice not to have to wear a coat. Now I have to get my boots out again, and on and on and on. The woe is me.
Yeah.
So that likely is attached to a lack-based mindset. And where did that lack-based mindset come from? We don't know. For each individual, it can be different.
Different. And just even a pattern of just resisting the as is.
Right, because we can't just accept.
We can't just accept it is what it is.
Right. And then we have a choice. What do we want to do with that? Like it's forecast snow.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that kind of sucks. And
Yes.
now what? Am I going to resist it and think about shoveling and think about more melt and more mud? Or am I going to look at it as, look at that.
Exactly.
It just is.
Yeah. And also, just in terms of resisting the as is, there's a contrast built into that of, and going with your example of the winter and the snow, comfort versus being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right? Just because, oh, like, well, if the weather is nice and it's warm and you're feeling comfortable, like you like it, you're in flow with it. But then when it's cold or it's miserable and you're uncomfortable. So there's a contrast right there as well.
Mm-hmm. There's so many layers.
Yeah.
When you start to
so
look
many
at
layers.
And I think just recognizing, bringing it back to the contrast is when we have a painful experience in the moment.
Yes.
And if we can stay in the moment with that pain and accept the contrast to we were feeling great an hour ago or whatever it was, that it just gives us the opportunity to appreciate both.
Yeah.
Because I don't run from the difficulties like I used to, or try to fix it. Like, let me make it better. Let me get rid of it. I don't want to deal with it.
That's a really good point, because that is one of the beautiful, beautiful benefits of doing this work, of learning to go inward and learning to ride these out, because it does just move through and passes through. Whereas before, something like that, when I was in resistance to whatever was going on, it could alter and impact my well-being, my mood for hours, days, weeks. Like, That's the one thing that I'm really noticing about doing this work is that when I quote unquote have a bad day or bad, or just feel crappy, it just really just moves through me much more
Right.
quickly versus where I was perpetually in that space before this
Exactly.
work. I can look
Exactly.
back now and say, God, I remember I was just always feeling so like angst inside and so
Mm-hmm.
miserable inside because I had so many layers, right? That sedimentation of all of that pain and suffering, all that inner child stuff
Yep.
that needed to be healed, that needed to be felt and recognized. My inner child needed all of that. And every layer that gets healed,
Mm-hmm.
the water becomes clearer,
Right.
right? So we
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
often about
Right. As a mug.
our the muck
Yeah.
and the pond, the stagnant. So yeah, so before my life, my inner landscape was that marsh, that mucky water with layers and layers of sedimentation. And literally, and again, going back to, well, any of this work. And another analogy is the iron, the layers of the iron. But for this
Yeah.
moment, let's just use the
Muck.
sedimentation. I'm thinking about science class when,
Yep.
all those
Yep.
layers, right? And you're just going one layer at a time, like take
Mm-hmm.
off the surface, heal that. Okay, now the next, the next, the next. And now the water is running clear in my inner world.
Right.
And when something now comes along, and trips me up, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever the case is.
Yeah. Because it still
Either
happens.
it still happens, or maybe
Right.
just still something settled again or got
Mm-hmm.
kicked up again
Right.
in the water. Okay, so now go back and revisit that. But then it just
Exactly.
moves. It just moves.
Exactly.
Like I love the analogy and the metaphor of water
Mm-hmm.
for all of this work.
Yeah. And recognizing that it's just an experience.
Yeah.
It's we don't have to make it more or less. So, and just to be clear, when we talk about this accepting this pain and all of that, it doesn't mean we don't do something. We're not passive.
Right. Oh,
Because
I
I
do a
think so many
lot.
people hear that, oh, you're just going to be a pushover and let all this pain happen and you're not going to do anything. And then what's going to happen
No,
next?
it's
No,
the
it's
opposite.
exactly. So I just want to be clear in that there's a lot of work that still happens. And then you may take action because there's times there's painful stuff happening and you need
Yes.
to take action to change that.
Yes, you might need to leave a situation. You might need to
Right.
set a boundary in a situation.
Exactly.
There
Doesn't mean you
are,
don't do anything.
right. And even if I don't do like an outward action, like a boundary or
Yes.
leave, or there's still so much action going on inside of me.
Exactly.
Inside, like
Exactly.
I'm deconstructing, I'm going inward, I'm pausing, I'm meditating, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going in, feeling the feelings. I'm Where is this coming from, what is going on, rather than projecting out, and I'm just slow
Exactly.
it down and I heal the pain.
Right.
Right, we're talking about pain. I heal the pain, and it's
Right.
again,
And integrate it.
and integrate it, and most of the time it's my inner child. It
Yep.
is mostly my inner child.
Right.
So, and all that has to be healed, otherwise those layers of sedimentation are just going to keep on building.
Exactly. And there's two other things I wanted to bring in from what you said. When you were, and I was there too, as many people before doing this work. So you were stuck in this place.
Yes.
And then what happens is then we spill it out onto those around us.
Yes, I
And
did.
so we're taking the painful situation, making it more painful because of our inner child, and then we're putting that out oftentimes. I mean, some people internalize and just go within and beat themselves up, but oftentimes it spills over onto others who didn't ask for that. And so
Mostly our
recognizing
kids.
that, right, that's exactly where I was thinking, or those that we care about that are
Yeah.
close to. And then the other thing that I wanted to just mention, and you've said it before, we've said it before in previous episode, is the classic, things are not happening to me, they're happening
Yeah.
for me. And just that mindset shift of, rather than thinking the world is against you and, oh, why does this happen to me? It's that opportunity. These are happening for me to grow. So that contrast to grow and evolve and heal, should we take the invitation? And we're inviting you to take, listeners, to take that invitation to heal and grow. in the contrast, in the pain, instead of pushing it away.
Beautiful summary. Beautiful way of bringing this episode to a close. It was perfect. Absolutely.
Awesome.
It's here for us to grow.
Mm.
So we invite you, and we appreciate all of you listening as we work through this episode today.
And stay tuned for next week's episode, because
Yes.
we love coming together and sharing, and we're enjoying bringing in guests now. And so having other voices and other ways to talk about all of this work, because there's no one way to do the work. There's no one way to experience it. There's only your way. And we wish you well as you don't push away the pain, invite, integrate, feel any
Yes.
painful moments, then that contrast.
Embrace.
Yes. Embrace. I love that.
All right, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for all of your support.
We appreciate it. Take care. Bye.